So, as we continue our conversation today, we're going to be looking at a very timely, of course, discussion. It's definitely not beyond dispute. The whole idea of abortion in Jewish law. We'll focus on that, even though the sources they're mainly about that, about in what Jewish continuity in the sense of procreation, but they definitely bring other sources that mitigate those understandings to bring us to a place that we understand that life is a primary, of course, prerogative of the Jewish people. But we are people of values too. And values, certain values for us to keep are as important as our physical life. I can simply tell you that in Jewish law, there are certain things that you ought to die before you commit them, such as adultery, incest, murder, and idol worshiping. So one of these three, they're the three cardinal no-nos. So if you are supposed to give your life for something, right, it means that there's a value, beyond the physical life. But of course, we need the physical life to create a society. If we don't have the continuation, the physical continuation of the species, then there's nothing to talk about. So before we go to the video, I want to connect a few ideas to where we are also with the whole discussion with Roe v. Wade and how it is in conversation with Judaism, where it is in conversation with Judaism and where it's not currently. I would just put out there for us to think, and we'll revisit it at the end of the session, a very cardinal question. Where does life begin? I mean, that really is I think the question, because I think, everybody essentially wants and doesn't want to see abortion. I'm sure, I don't think there's somebody with an intentional idea to just look for and promote abortions. But there are different levels of how we treat life. When it begins, how, in what sense, and when can we prevent the even possibility of life? Of course, I'm speaking of contraception. So is it in conversation with where we are now in the United States and where Judaism is? And of course, the last thing I would say, we're talking about a range, just like anything else. We have the more conservative views that would probably use more primary sources as and they go as primary as you can get to the Torah. But there are others who would say, of course, we've progressed from what the Torah is saying and actually may not be saying so much. I think the Talmud is saying more about it, of course, and we'll look at these sources. And of course, about the conversations about teaching. This is here we're talking about what is the essence of this conversation. So the essence of this conversation is, can we agree on anything that would, at the end of the day, will be the law of the land? And that's really these big questions to lay out. Okay, let's look at the video. Does anybody want to say something before we watch the video? Okay.
In the 1960s and 70s, the Israeli government struggled with a fundamental tension as they attempted to increase the Jewish population in Israel. On the heels of two major wars, they wanted more soldiers in the army. And recognizing a looming demographic threat from the Palestinians, they were desperate to maintain a Jewish majority. At the same time, the country was still rather poor, and those Jews with the highest birth rates were among the poorest and least assimilated. Lawmakers who advocated for increasing the Jewish birth rate also struggled with the financial risks of doing so, meaning the state would have to support the families financially. Additionally, lawmakers worried about the mental and physical health of children living in poverty and ultimately threatening the quality of soldiers in the army. The debate came to a head in the Knesset in the mid-1970s as they discussed legalizing abortion. The question centered on one clause in the proposed law, the socioeconomic clause, which would have allowed abortion for socioeconomic reasons, like already having a big family. A few politicians zeroed in on the quality versus quantity tension in this discussion. Chaviv Shmaoni, a member of the Labor Party, stated, "It's doubtful that society desires children whose births are not even wanted by their parents. Families with many children are blessed by those children only if the families have the financial and emotional ability to raise them and educate them." Here, Shmaoni drew on a common phrase in Hebrew, Mishpacha Bruchat Yeladim, a family blessed with children, to refer to families with many children. But he clarified that these children are not a blessing unless their parents have the means to support them and raise them well. In other words, he believed those children add value to the family and to society only if the family can afford them. Member of Knesset Oren Amir expressed concern for a woman's quality of life when she's had so many children. Referencing Haredi ultra-Orthodox women, she said, "Already, many women are constantly pregnant. Women who at the age of 27, 28, 29 are mothers to 8, 9, or 10 children. These women are exhausted, sad, have no energy, no money, and are sick. The responsibility to care for the children and educate them falls on their shoulders." Taking aim at religious families, Namir asked, "Does this preserve a family's holiness, a person's holiness? What isn't good for the person, and the mother's also a person, and what isn't good for the family won't be good for the army or the nation either. And permit me, the secular woman, to say it also won't be good for the religion." The tension in the abortion debate in Israel in the 1970s reveals how Israeli lawmakers struggled with wanting to increase the quantity of Jewish children without threatening the quality of a woman's life, a family, the army, the country, and Judaism itself. Reading and discussing biblical and rabbinic texts, and more recent data from social scientific studies, you will see how the discussion over the permissibility and use of contraception in Jewish communities demonstrates the various forms this debate over quality and quantity in Jewish procreation has taken. When we think about Jewish reproductive values, we often prioritize the pro-natalist elements. Pru urvu, be fruitful and multiply, the first commandment God gives to Adam and Eve in Sefer Bereshit, is often touted as one of the most important commandments. Our holidays, like Passover, are centered around teaching our children. Many Jewish communities in the United States offer financial support for Jewish education. Synagogues are expanding their family programming and working to make services more child-friendly. And when we think about the discourse surrounding intermarriage, we see that many people focus on the question of children who result from that union. How can we make sure those children are part of a Jewish community? This is not an issue unique to America, as we've already seen that Israel is similarly preoccupied with the question of Jewish continuity through reproduction. Israel's many reproductive policies encourage reproduction among Jews, whether it's through parental leave policies or covering the cost of fertility treatments. To be sure, Jewish communities encourage reproduction. But as you read the sources about contraception, you'll see that there's an equally strong consideration for a parent's quality of life and for the quality of life of resulting children. What makes this conversation so interesting is that the terms and definitions are constantly shifting depending on context. For some people, quality is determined by one's own professional successes. And this is often in tension with increasing one's family size. For others, the quality of one's life is enhanced by increasing the quantity of one's children. The sources demonstrate both legalistic ways that contraception has been understood to function in Jewish family life and how Jewish families of the 20th and 21st centuries have engaged with this tension between quality and quantity in questions of procreation. This discussion is particularly important today as concerns about low reproductive rates among Jews in America proliferate, leaving many Jews without children, whether by choice or due to infertility, to feel ostracized from the Jewish community. Those who struggle with fertility issues often don't have the opportunity to decide between quality of life or quantity of children. We need to understand the many sides to this debate and develop new approaches to reconciling the tension. One possible outcome is that Jewish organizations concerned about demographics in the Jewish community can gain a more robust understanding of how Jewish families struggle to balance these competing values and therefore do more to support Jewish families, whatever their size.
Okay. Oh, I see we have two more participants since we went to video. Should we go to video again then?
No.
Do
we know who iPhone is?
We don't. I don't. Hopefully, somebody from the synagogue.
But we invited everybody, so.
Yes, right. So, okay, so this is what Dr. Raucher is saying. Basically, she laid out this argument that although it's a high aspiration for the Jewish people to have children, it's not the only aspiration. And there are equally important values that we hold that as a community, if some people will have children and some other people would hold other values and other things for the community. So that's basically the idea. How do you feel about the video that we just watched? Yeah, Ellen?
I found it was very sensitive to many different points of view.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I heard them better. I'd listened to it once before, and I heard her more clearly this time, weighing the different sides of the issue with sympathy for all sides of it, really. I agree with you, Ellen.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Miriam? You'll have to unmute.
I think there's a similarity in the position in the United States and Israel, and that's that what we have now is a law for the land, a law that applies to everyone. And it was criticized when it first went into effect, Roe v. Wade, that it needed to be a state decision, not a national. But it sounds like Israel is dealing with the same issue. You have so many different groups and different concerns about quantity and quality. There are similarities in all of this.
Right. I mean, also, it translates into theological discussion, of course, too, because the reason that some people are not concerned with the number of children is because they hold by God will provide, that we do the mitzvah and God provides. And interestingly enough, God provides for them. In Israel, they're very strong political power, and they know how to,
Manipulate.
toss their weight around, and they succeed. So somehow, they do get budgets for the yeshivas, and they learn all day. And okay, to each his own.
It's the same thing. Mary was just saying the same thing in Rockland County, in Muncie. The same thing in the 5 towns, Cedarhurst,
Lakewood.
Lakewood, exactly, Lakewood. They get on the boards, and if you're not an Orthodox Jew, forget it. Your kids suffer and their kids don't. But there's another thing, and very good friend of mine lives in Rockland County. She said that the Orthodox up there have civil, don't have, they have religious marriage, but they're not legally married. And so the women apply for help as single parents.
You mean civil?
Civil, right.
No
No civil union.
marriage.
No.
Yeah,
Right.
because they don't really hold by that necessarily.
No.
Although, that's the interesting thing, because there is a law in Jewish law that in halacha, that the law of the land is the law that we have to abide by.
Right.
Dina de malchuta dina. It's the law of the king is the law.
When in Rome, do as Rome.
Unless it comes directly in conflict with Judaism and the Jewish law, like the Greeks tried to forbid certain things in certain areas. But other than that, I think we should abide, of course, by the law of the land. So some can argue that they have to be married in the state, and even if they're not, they did not actually file the paperwork, they will still be considered married in the eyes of the state. So, but that's a different story. But I think it is important, because we're trying to find where I think our values in America and the Jewish value, I think that would be a fascinating, right, to concentrate on this for today. Let's look at the sources. The first source, of course, everybody would always go to is God blesses the Adam and Eve, and telling them that they should have children, be fruitful and multiply.
Mark.
So let's if somebody can, let's go from the top. You appear for me. So Judy, would you please start?
Sure. And God created human beings in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth.
Okay, so the conversation does start here, but it only starts here. But it's very important to understand what starts here. Anybody who would read this text either feel obligated by this text or not obligated by this text, right? I mean, there can be only two options here. If you're a Jewish or a Christian, or anybody who feels obligated by this text, great. Otherwise, you can still read it, but not be obligated to it. But these are the two approaches. Like Dr. Rauker was alluding to it, that when God says to Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply, there are two ways to read it. And this is where the conversation begins. Either as a commandment, that it's an obligation to engage in multiplication. And the second one is a blessing, because it does say that God first blessed them, and then he said to them. So you could also look at this not as the first commandment and really look at the first commandment as the tree of knowledge, but as a blessing. Oh, I love you so much, my creation. I wish you would be so many of you, right? So it's a blessing. It's not saying, okay, you now have to supply a quota to earth to be considered like that you filled the earth. So that's really the conversation. Is it a blessing or is it a commandment? Because those who see that a commandment would have the total different approach, either if they're Jews or Christians or otherwise. And those who see it as a blessing would say, yes, of course, children are blessing. But if that blessing is overshadowing my other blessings in life, right? And I'm not commanded, this is a blessing. So I would weigh where my blessings are greater. So really, this is where it begins. Of course, we can talk about this verse for another day or two, but let's keep going. If that's clear, if you anybody would like to comment on this before we continue.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Yes, Elaine.
Is a baby when it's conceived? When is a baby a baby?
You went right there. I was going to have a longer vestibule to get
No,
there, but you got to the tachlis. You're a woman of action. So, but this is again from a Jewish perspective. I assume you asked.
Well, you asked at the beginning of your lesson, when does life begin? Is that what you asked?
That's the main question that we have to determine as the law of the land. Just like did we determine the age of marriage, right? Before that, you have to have permission from your parents or it's illegal. So we've determined, I think it's 17, right? In America, there is a federal, I think, age, isn't it?
I don't have any of this.
By state, I don't know, but there is I think there is. I think 17 is the
Unless you live down south, that you could be 12 or 13.
And that's exactly what we're trying to prevent. And in Judaism, we'll see a source that will allude to that age too, because that's the age of physical maturity. So if you go by only the physical, right, you would start at 12 for women and 13 and my grandparents were married at that age. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that people still maintain that. So, but putting it this, in context, the baby from a Jewish perspective, and that's what we have to determine here, right? Jews are not, in charge of the law of the land, but from a Jewish perspective, it's the 40 days. That's what makes the baby part of the Jewish of the woman's body. Before that, the Talmud says it's water. It's kind of a fluid, and then 40 days, and of course 40 days is symbolic in Judaism, but it does mean something because it's about where the first heartbeat starts. So if you look at it from that perspective, maybe because they didn't rely on ultrasound and they really had to just guesstimate, just like we guesstimate with bat mitzvah and bar mitzvah. Not every adolescent matures at the same time. So, but about 40 days is where the heartbeat. So many would say it's really the heartbeat because that's the electricity. That's where it starts pumping and it becomes a fetus. And then from that point, you shouldn't be aborting it unless you have the right circumstances. And we'll see from the Jewish sources that there are many circumstances that you're allowed to abort, and of course to contracept. I would just add one thing before we move on. The idea of a be fruitful and multiply, we also can see in different ways. You know, we have, I think our group today is pretty diverse in that sense, you know, where we are in terms of that. And I think it's, you know, we can multiply, be fruitful and multiply in many ways. And we will see that also from our Jewish sources. Okay. We'll continue with the, I'll skip number 2 because it's not really, well, maybe it is important to show that it's, the man is obligated. Anne, would you please read the
And God said to him, I am El Shaddai, be fertile and increase. A nation, yea, an assembly of nations shall descend from you. Kings shall issue from your loins. I think this is very different from the first one.
It is very, and how do you see it different? This is God's,
Well,
this is God's blessing for Jacob.
It's, you know, about nationhood. I mean, the idea of becoming a nation, a people, and that is not what's in the first one. The first one is you're blessed and then you give back to God. You're enlarging his creation. You're giving him more of what he wants. That's not exactly the way I would phrase it.
Well, I think
but yeah.
you're pointing out something, that this is nationhood, because the difference between these two sources is this is God speaking to mankind, right? And here it's the Jewish nation. This is Jacob who starts Israel, you know, the nation of Israel. So definitely it's a different context. It's very different. And this is what Dr. Raucher also alluded to in the discussion in Israel. It was about the army, you know, the nationhood. We need to protect the nation. We need the bodies to protect the nation, to establish that. And creating a nation is kind of is part of a development of not Jewish, but human, part of the human development.
I mean, the whole question of power comes in. Kings shall issue from your loins.
Exactly.
Kings,
Yes.
people with power.
Yes, war and chaos. If kings were substituted for, I don't expect women, but man shall issue from your loins instead of kings, it would have been more peaceful. But kings is already heralding chaos and war.
So you're saying they're using here,
Yeah.
you know, pronatalism
Yeah,
to promote power.
right, because
Yeah.
men wrote this,
Mhm.
absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
Okay. All right. Yeah, Judy, did you want to?
If it had said women, if it instead of kings, if it had said women, then it would have been greater opportunities for people.
Never happened, never happened.
Well,
All right, okay,
we're progressing.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so then the next source is from the Talmud. And Sarah, would you please read that?
I'm sorry, Rabbi, am I reading number 3 or number 4?
3.
3. Ben Azari says, one who does not engage in procreation sheds blood and animals, the image of God, as it says. In his image did God make human beings, and it is written, and you be fertile and increase.
Okay, so as we unpacked, or we're starting to unpack that discussion where it really starts, right? The obligation or the blessing. So clearly Ben Azai taking it very literally, and definitely on the side of the commandment, right? He's literally saying that. So I would say he represents the kind of the conservative outlier, you know, and then we'll see then the more liberal one on the other side.
It's a really strong statement when he says annuls the image of God. In other words, that's a powerful statement.
Yeah. If you have a choice to bring something that is created in the image of God and you're not doing it,
Sheds
you are
blood.
decreasing the image of God on earth. And actually, it's the same. There's another saying here, just to give you a context for this, that says that a person that does not, in their generation, the temple was not rebuilt, then it's like it was destroyed in their generation. So it's kind of the same idea. If you have a choice, you have the opportunity to bring more image of God into this world and you're not, it's like you are destroying it.
Rabbi, what
Yes.
about the Maimonides principles where he says God has no form? But when Maimonides says God has no form, what about that? It confuses
right.
me.
We don't take it. We take that you bring more another soul into this world. And that's actually, you know what? Your question is very important, because in the discussion of where life starts, actual, has legal protection under the law, some would say is when the first breath is taken, because that's where the soul comes in. And that's when you really become an image of God. When you're still in your mother's womb, you have not been inserted yet that soul. Although if you are, if you hold by the 40-day rule of Judaism, you also believe that the soul, it comes in at 40 days. The heartbeat is where that the soul starts pumping. There are other places that say in the Torah that the soul lives in the blood. And that's why we're not permitted to eat blood in Judaism. And we have to kosher things and we have to drain the blood out, because the soul of the animal is in the blood. So if there's blood and it pumps, there's a heartbeat, it means that the soul is already working. So I'm being very fundamentalist, I guess, fundamentalist, in bringing this this conversation to the very basic, of the sources and where it touches. So Ben Azai clearly is the kind of the more conservative side of things, taking it literally and as a mitzvah. And now we fast forward, as we say. We have the source from David Ben Gurion, of course, the first prime minister of Israel. I always am. I loved the idea that one time I visited his cabin in the Negev in Sde Boker, and for the first time I realized when he died, because for me as a kid, Ben Gurion was like the king of Israel, and it was so removed from me. But then I read there that he died in December 73. So I was already, we've overlapped for like a year and a change in Israel. It always makes me feel good about that. The continuation. So David Ben Gurion, some would claim that he could have been the spirit of the Messiah, because he brought the Jews back to Israel. And this is what he says about procreation. The next, Elaine, next on my
Alright.
dial.
Okay, if the Jewish birth rate is not increased, it is doubtful that the Jewish state will survive. It just sounds like him. As we have seen from 1951 to 1966, the Jewish birth rate declined from 26.1 to 16.1 per thousand, whereas among the Arabs, it rose from 37.6 to 43.4. The bodies that must deal with this problem are Jewish men's and women's organization in Israel and the Jewish Agency. And this must be done in two ways. A, to bring home to the Jewish woman and the Jewish family that the future of their nation depends on their producing a sufficient number of healthy children. B, to provide large Jewish families with more economic, social, and educational assistance. Jewish women's organizations such as WIZO, Women's International Zionist Organization, and the Working Mothers Organization are doing good work. It is incumbent upon them to explain to women of European origin, as well as to those born in Israel, and to every Jewish woman capable of understanding the unique needs of a nation such as Israel, that their prime obligation to their people is to have at least 4 children, and as far as possible, within 8 to 10 years after getting married. Any Jewish woman who, as far as it depends on her, does not bring into the world at least 4 healthy children is shirking her duty to the nation, like a soldier who evades military service. And it is the duty of the Jewish people as a whole to provide women with the economic, cultural, and social conditions to enable them to give these children a proper upbringing and education.
Wow.
Wow.
Laid it on the line.
Wow. So you must have something to say about this. Clearly, predominantly women here. I don't know how iPhone identifies, but Judy, what's your reaction here? You have 4 children.
I
So
have
you
4
did your
children.
duty.
I guess. I passed muster.
Yeah, and now your grandchildren are in the Israeli army, so you're really
Actually, yeah,
you
2 of them.
fulfilled both obligations. Very good. You can get those.
I did not know this. I did not know that Ben Gurion said that. This is really interesting.
Yeah, because then you kind of you multiply literally the people. So it's very nice. So yeah, I mean, of course, that's the 70s or 60s, late 60s. So people definitely, I would vouch for it. That was definitely the sentiment in kind of the air that people should get married and increase. And that's part of actually why the gay issue was I think very difficult for Israelis for the same reason that it meant no grandchildren. It doesn't necessarily mean that today, but back then it meant just, okay, I'm not gonna have grandchildren. Okay.
Well, Ben Gurion's approach was just practical and realistic.
Right, right.
He needed numbers. That's it. Bottom
Right.
line.
Bottom
And-
line, it was very
and
practical.
Yeah, and today also, I mean, the situation hasn't changed. When you think that the number of Jews in the world is barely 17 million, and the number of Christians,
Yeah, let me
Muslims,
share that. I'll share it
Buddhists,
with you.
way, the numbers are phenomenally askew.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, we never really, am I up share?
Did we send that out, the numbers? I don't think so.
You
No.
did, you sent it, no, we didn't send it out, but you
I-
sent it to me.
I sent it to you, yeah.
So I'm looking for it to share it. But I'm gonna find it. Oh, here it is. Okay. So let me try to share.
By the way, I looked up age of 18, you have, you can get married and legally, and at 14 with parent consent.
Oh, starting 14 already.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow, right.
That's and that's federal?
The age of consent, an emancipation of a minor, of minors is 18. Exception exists with parental consent and judicial approval. A person can marry under the age of 18, but the adolescent partners and the minor's parents have to meet with court officials who must rule out abuse or coercion.
Yeah.
I don't know, just from Wikipedia.
Wow. Wow.
Hmm.
Yeah, there are sects of Jews, that they have to then kind of change their location. I don't know why it's not sharing this with you. Anyway, I can read it. It's it'll be easier probably. The number of Jews in the world, according to those numbers, is
17.
but it's also important to look at the percentage of the world and what it represents. Somehow
Less than 1%.
but yeah, there's about 2 and something billion Christians and almost 2 billion
Muslims.
2.3 billion Christians, 1.9 billion Muslims. That represent, so Christians represent 31% of the world population. Muslims almost 25%, the 2 billion. So I guess they're going by almost 8 billion people in the world. Hinduism is 1.1 billion, which is 15%. Buddhism is 506 million. They're half billionaires. And that's 5%. So, and that's 506 million. And then Jews, and that number that I have here is 14.7 million.
That's because it's people who identify as religious.
Oh.
There are Jews
Right.
who are in
Yeah.
no religion group.
Yeah. So even if it's 18 million, it's not even 1%
Not
of
right.
Jewish of the world population. So, wow.
It's something that most people don't realize.
They don't realize, yeah.
And it's a really important figure, seems to me.
Of course. Just like they don't really realize how small Israel is. It's almost inconceivable. Okay, so we'll continue with this. I wanted to share with you something else, but as I'm gonna do it as we go. It's a statement by the National Council of Jewish Women, who really by like 5 points enumerated the Jewish stands on abortion. Very good. They did a good summary with that. So, okay, share screen. I don't know why I'm not able to find that.
You had it there for a second and then it flashed and then it left.
Right.
Yeah, okay, I see now.
Okay.
Okay. Give me one second. This should work. Okay. Here it is. Okay, so this is very interesting. Rabbi Elliot Dorff is on the kind of conservative side of the conservative movement. So kind of maybe from a different perspective, a Jewish, more halachic perspective, but this is not just halachic, but cultural. Okay, Adrian, you want to read that source?
Those who can produce or adopt children should see it as a mitzvah of the highest order to have more than the minimal number of two, for nothing less than the future of the Jewish community and of Judaism depends on that. The Jewish community, after all, lost a third of its members in the Holocaust, and contemporary Jews are not producing enough children even to maintain their present numbers. Add to these factors, the high rate of intermarriage and assimilation among Jews today, and it becomes clear that we Jews are in serious demographic trouble as a people. One needs a Jewish education to become an informed, practicing Jew, of course, but people can be educated only if they exist in the first place. The mitzvah of procreation, like all other commandments, does not apply to those who cannot fulfill it.
Okay, I'm going to stop for a second here because he's also the one who wrote the Teshuvah, the response about gay marriage, the gay rights and the conservative movement.
Remember Elliot Dorff, right?
Yeah, so he's referring to just, if gay people can't bring children to the world, they're not obligated.
Mm-hmm.
And other people, of course, that can't bring children. Okay.
But for those who can, propagation or adoption is literally a matter of life and death for us, not only as individuals, but as families, but also as a people.
Okay. Very good. So this is a good segue to the next source that we will look at, the conversation, because what he's saying is, the mitzvah of procreation, definitely there's a mitzvah. He's holding that there's a mitzvah like this. It wasn't just the blessing, but like other commandment, it doesn't apply to those who cannot fulfill it. And being not able to fulfill it can be many options, and could be considering the woman's health, the woman's spiritual health, but essentially it's a good segue to the conversation about the legality of it. Is it a legal question only, or is it also an educational question? I would say definitely at a certain point we have to understand where we begin life and the legal ramifications of that and the rights of that the fetus or the child. But there's so much more than that. It's not just the act of abortion. It's part of a whole package of education, because what people claim, and those who are, of course, now went through very to length to reverse Roe v. Wade, is to say, we can't use abortion as contraception. We have to be also responsible and to really understand that we deal with life, not just a piece of meat and just abortion of convenience. And that's really, of course, the main claim. So I think Elliot Dorff is kind of in the middle of that. We would say I would recommend. Well, I'm sorry.
Isn't that footnote is interesting? Ben Gurion is in number one.
Yes.
Is intentional in arguing in the effort to increase birth rate is a
Right.
responsibility of Jewish organizations rather than the Israeli government policies that didn't apply to all citizens, both Jews and Arabs, would be seen as discriminatory. That's really interesting.
Yeah. No, he saw them as equal. Yeah. So even, in the modern state of Israel, the state helps anybody who wants to give birth.
Mm.
Okay, so yeah, that's the state, but if, of course, Jewish organizations do their job. You want to, this is a fascinating source. And that's why in the discussion of education versus legal, I think we should definitely emphasize contraception, because there's really, at the level of contraception, we are not, there's not a lot of argument. Even if you're a fundamentalist, there's no argument that, for example, marriage is not only for the purpose of procreation. It's also, when you engage in marital relations, it's as we call it, recreational. It's not, doesn't have to be obligatory. So these are the three situations that women are allowed to use contraception. It's called moch in Hebrew. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but I think it's maybe, if you know Seinfeld, maybe something like the sponge or something. Sponge worthy, not sponge worthy. That episode.
Yeah, I saw it
Yes.
recently.
So I would say that's probably what moch was for them. Okay. Ellen, would you, and maybe just before you read it, everybody also agrees it's a medical procedure. So the question is, how to treat that triage in medical procedure? Who comes first? Who comes second? But go ahead.
Right, am I reading
6.
6? Okay, Babylonian Talmud, and it says Ketubot
That's the tractate, page 39,
39a.
side A.
The central body of rabbinic law, dialectic, and lore comprised of the Mishnah and the Gemara, the latter being an exposition and elaboration of the former. Two separate Talmudic compilations exist: the Babylonian Talmud 500 CE and the Jerusalem Talmud, also known as the Talmud of the land of Israel 400 CE.
Yeah, okay, so let's separate that. That was just the background to the what the Talmud is, what the Babylonian Talmud. So now we'll see what is they're talking about contraception.
It is permitted 3 categories of women to engage in relations with a contraceptive resorbent moch, or moch, whatever you said. These are they: a minor, a pregnant woman, and a nursing woman. The Baraita elaborates, a minor may do so lest she conceive and die.
Okay, keep reading. I'm sorry.
A pregnant woman, lest her existing fetus be crushed by another fetus and assume the shape of a sandalfish if she conceives a second time, and a nursing woman, lest she conceive, causing her milk to spoil, which will lead her to wean her child prematurely, endangering his health.
Yeah. So, okay, we have to explain that. The 3 cases are basically a child between 11 and 12 years old. So let's say even if she is able to get pregnant, but she's too small to carry the baby, and she can get her the baby, but it's really about them. It's about their and the fetus. The second situation is when it's a condition called, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, superfetation, that you can get pregnant while you're pregnant. So you can, even if you're in the I don't know, you're in your 4th month of one pregnancy, you can get pregnant again. conceive
Rabbi,
again.
I never heard of that.
I never
Yeah,
have
so I
either.
know, and that's
I don't think
interesting.
it's true.
I don't
Yeah,
think
no,
that's
that
true.
is.
Physiologically, I don't think
It-
that's
That is absolutely. There's a condition like that. It's it's dangerous for mainly for the fetuses too, because one crushes the other. So that's what they're talking about, that case. So you're allowed to use contraception while you're pregnant to prevent that rare occasion where you can conceive again. So that's the second scenario. And the third scenario is a woman who is pregnant, and she is nursing, the baby is, I guess, within the first year or two, and she gets pregnant again, and then she becomes dry of milk, so she can't nurse her. So I don't know what they exactly meant, because I know so many women who had children consecutively, and they nurse basically. I never heard, but for those situations that the woman cannot nurse, that's why they had the wet nurse, right? The wet nurse.
Okay.
Yeah. So they it's fascinating for me. When I looked into it, it meant that wetner is she doesn't have to be pregnant, or she doesn't have to be just after a recent birth. If she keeps nursing, her body is going to keep giving milk. So here I'm talking to a group of women, and I'm explain that to you.
I think we need a gynecologist on
Need
the
a
show.
gynecologist. Yeah.
You're
So,
thinking-
okay. So what do you think about listen, even if you agree with these cases or not, but this is a clear example of the rabbis discussing this before the 5th century. So when I hear, for example, the argument in the Roe v. Wade argument that said that our founding fathers did not consider abortion, or did not consider that scenario. So it's not written in the Constitution, but I'm sure they were aware of all those scenarios. If our rabbis are talking about it in the 5th century, they definitely were aware of all these situations and risks and all that. Why they didn't put it in the Constitution?
I doubt that they were aware of it.
Really? You think that they weren't aware of all these
Well,
scenarios?
I don't know if anyone in this group has heard of superfetation before. I certainly haven't.
I just looked it up. They said in extremely rare cases, usually the eggs are not produced once the woman is pregnant, but once in a while an egg might be produced, and the egg could then embed itself a fertilized egg could embed itself in the uterus, but it's an extremely rare situation, superfetation.
Right. So, but they were allowing all women who are pregnant to use contraception.
Right.
I think that's pretty,
It's yeah.
important to know that that's what they did in the, it would be interesting to see what would be the equivalent of the Jerusalem Talmud in this. I don't know. I actually will write to myself a note to self. From Jerusalem
I think they'd be more enlightened.
Talmud, because they tended to be a little more conservative that way, because it's somehow it works that way.
Excuse me, I'm on the iPhone because I'm in.
Carol.
No,
But if it's okay to interrupt, what did they consider contraception in those days? That was the permittable contraception.
So that moch,
it's
I think, and
sponge.
it's better not be a mock. It's supposed to be like a sponge or something.
So your reference to Elaine and Seinfeld was very apropos.
Yeah, you definitely know. They used it also in such a, listen, those shows like Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm, these are Jewish shows.
Right.
The
Right.
debates they're having, the conversations
Right.
they're having at the coffee shop, these are conversations that they're saying it's about nothing, but it's not. I mean, these are Talmudic conversations that try to get to the principle of things, so, very Jewish that way. So I think of all the sources that we're looking at, I really love this source because it really is showing how progressive, I would say, Judaism is. And in a sense, I don't know how the image of the rabbis became so, orthodox, but they weren't always that orthodox. So, okay. So Maimonides in his Mishneh Torah, when he divided took the whole Talmud and put it in 14 volumes. And one of them is Hilchot Ishut, in one of his tractates. And let's read that. Let's see who is obligated in even having children in this world. Carol, can you read it? All right. You're muted. Okay, we won't bother you. Judy, we're back.
Actually, oh, okay.
I'm in and out of transit in the car. I can't really.
Okay, no worries, no worries.
The mitzvah of being fruitful and multiplying is incumbent on the husband and not on the wife. When does a man become obligated to fulfill this mitzvah? From the time he reaches 17. If he reaches 20 and has not married, he's considered to have transgressed and negated the observance of this positive commandment. If, however, he is occupied with the study of Torah and absorbed in this endeavor and is hesitant to marry, lest he be forced to work to support his wife and thus be prevented from studying Torah, he is permitted to delay marriage. For a person who is occupied in the performance of one mitzvah is exempt from the obligation to perform another. Surely this applies with regard to the study of Torah.
Okay.
Okay.
I love
Very,
it.
very different approach. So you didn't even know it wasn't even about you. It's really all about the man.
Yeah.
And it's his obligation.
A biggest hunt. Go ahead.
Good, then go ahead. Gay gesund to hay.
Right.
Oh, well, if you're gay, that's a different story. So it's the obligation of the man, but what's interesting here, of course, regardless of the 17, right? It's the same like hearing, the 12 or 13-year-old girl that are allowed to be married. But if we say, okay, the new 40 is the new 17, but nonetheless, the concept of delaying the marriage and procreation for another value. And why are they concluding by saying, surely this applies with regard to the study of Torah, because the Talmud tells us that study of Torah is equal to all other mitzvot. If you put on a scale studying Torah and all the other mitzvot, it'll be even. So if someone chooses to study Torah, he can delay procreation. So, yeah. So what do you think about this? Very sounding from the man's perspective. I don't want to say a little chauvinistic, but what is your opinion about it?
Probably a lot of women would be very happy.
It's funny, isn't it, that
But
that
it-
you're saying that women actually would be happy to hear that.
But it's also open for women today who are studying Torah and studying to be rabbis. They,
Ah,
Right.
that they didn't consider.
Right.
No.
So that in the Constitution, they did not consider, the Jewish Constitution was not considered. There were women who studied in the Talmud and wanted to perform more mitzvot and were allowed to a certain degree. But yeah, like if you're a daughter of an important rabbi, or if you are yourself an important woman, then you're allowed to sit among, you know, I mean, it's interesting. It's like there is a celebrity clause in that sense. Yeah.
Did somebody like Devorah have children? The judge?
The judge Devorah? I don't know. That's a good question. If she had children, I'm not sure. That's a good question. Yeah, Miriam?
I'm just wondering, what have the studies done on the health of women who by their late 20s have had 8, 9, 10 children? No, I'm
Right.
serious. I mean, they talk about their bodies being worn out. Well, I'm sure they are. And yet the man is sitting reading Torah, not having any of this physical responsibility. But really, what does it do to them
Right.
over that period of time as far as their health? And if
Well-
are they sickly? Are they in? There must be statistics somewhere to
Yeah. No, definitely. They studied the Haredi women, and the stories that I've heard, I mean, would seriously, for me, these stories that I heard about in the Haredi community, of course, for the most part, I guess they're happy with having many children, but there are many cases when the wives, the only time they get to rest is in that hospital, giving birth. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, that's really such a, I mean, I understand the approach of God provides. I'm there. I believe in God. I believe in that God intervenes in our lives. And I think for me, God showed me in my life several times. But nonetheless, you have to do the hishtadlut. That's the other side of believing that God provides. You have to do the best to make sure you help God to help you. So if they believe that God provides, they have to provide first. But the problem is that the women provide in those ultra-Orthodox communities. So they're bearing 17 children sometime and are raising them all. I mean, they're always, and some of them even go out to work, if you can believe it or not. Many of them, not one or two. And the older children, somehow there's a process that they're already raising the younger. I mean, they have their own methods of doing that. But, you know, and there was encouragement by the state also to, in Ben-Gurion's time, they gave 100 liras to women who had more than 10 children. And then, you know, child support for anybody who had any child, and if you had over 4 and above, I think it's also, so definitely encouraging that. But yes, there's something that these women are collapsing under the burden. That's for sure. And I think that is definitely an issue we have to look into in those communities. Okay. Yeah.
Do you want to know what the oral contraception was in ancient Rome and Greece?
No.
It was something called silphium, which was a species of giant fennel. They would also they would put the fennel in the vagina. They would also soak cotton or lint in the juice of this herb and insert it into their vaginas to prevent pregnancy.
Wow.
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 So it was Like, well, nowadays we would call it, the contraceptive method would be called the sponge.
Right,
And this was a form of the sponge.
like an iron dome.
Yeah, right. It's something to absorb the semen.
Wow.
All you needed was a fennel bulb.
That's it.
Fennel, the juices, well, I don't know why the juices from fennel.
Wow, that's very interesting.
It is interesting.
Silphium,
You
SILPHIUM.
can get it at Whole Foods, I bet.
Yes, right. No question.
Aldi's has it a little less expensive.
Don't tell anybody. The Supreme Court will ban it. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen again. We're going to skip one source, but we'll summarize it. The next source, aid with Dr. Sylvia Barak Fishman, she is basically showing that contrary to other educated women in the world, Jewish women are still expected and participate and feel like it's their obligation to have more children. And that's an interesting thing that distinguishes the Jewish population and the general population. The next, there's something about us very strongly needing to increase the Jewish people. Source number
Rabbi,
9.
can I excuse me, I mean, I'm in a bad place, but I just want to interrupt because I had this question before. I don't know if it was Ben Gurion's, the need to have people protecting Israel and also the need to have many children runs into a conflict in certain communities. I know, friends whose children who are not Hasidim, but they were Haredi and they go to, they'll come here rather than go in the army and they study. And yet, so one hand, they're encouraging them to have 8, 9, 10 children. The other hand, many of them do not go to the army. So how does that play out with any of this? I don't know if this is the right time, but I wanted to ask before I forgot and got lost.
No, they actually was in the introduction, actually.
Okay, that's what.
Yes,
Yeah.
Israel had to increase their population for those reasons, the army and also to fight the demographic issue with the Arabs. So that's a
The
big
population there
that's a race.
tends to be not going to go in the army, and it
So
runs
is
into tensions. Yeah, I said if the population that is mostly increasing are not army
And not-
participants,
Right,
then
that's a
it
good point,
causes a lot of other tensions and logistics and problems. Yeah.
Right. The ultra-Orthodox and the Arabs in Israel that don't go to the army. Right. So somewhere in the middle, we have the knitted yarmulkes, and they, they're Zionists, they go to the army, and they have that, they called hesder. They had an arrangement with the government that they do both. They go to yeshiva and they serve in the army.
My niece is in Efrat.
That's the best situation.
Six children before, but she said she would never marry anybody who wasn't in the army. It's a whole, they're in Efrat in the West Bank, so it's a different. That's the knit. They were knit hats, knit kippas.
Knitted yarmulkes, right? Kippas sruga, srugim. If you want to see that show in Israel, srugim.
Srugim?
Srugim. Sarug is knitted, so it's about the knitted yarmulke Jews in Jerusalem in the 90s. Yeah, late 90s. Very good. I haven't really seen it a lot. I lived it during those years. So, but I not in Jerusalem, but here. But it's modern Orthodoxy life. The next source, I think it's interesting. The Rabbi Dr. Benjamin Lau. He's the Rosh Beit Midrash of Bet Morashah in Jerusalem, and author of numerous articles and books. He's the famous family Lau. The current rabbi, the chief Ashkenazi rabbi of Israel is Lau also, and his uncle was the chief rabbi. Okay, so let's read that. Okay, Anne left us for a minute. Sarah, would you read that, please?
Yes. Rabbi Dr. Benjamin Lau, the two objectives of the institution of marriage, for she is your companion and the wife of your covenant. In our society, people are marrying at a later age, and we must do everything possible to help young people enter into marriage. Recognizing that marriage is not just an instrument to facilitate bringing children into the world, but that it constitutes a value in and of itself, in that it is not good for a person to be alone, obligates the halakhic authorities to exert themselves to encourage young people considering marriage. If leniency in the form of an allowance to delay the mitzvah of having children is likely to decide the issue in favor of a wedding, this should be given serious consideration. In contrast to the reasons that forbid a married man, as opposed to a bachelor, to delay the mitzvah of procreation, there are reasons to allow a couple to delay fulfillment of the mitzvah for a limited period of time, providing that they translate their emotional attachment into a marital bond.
Okay. What does this source mean to you? What does it say, basically?
You're not required to have children immediately.
Right. So first of all,
long as you get
definitely
married.
allowing contraception.
Right,
Right. He's not saying it, but that's really what it means.
exactly.
That the relationship is important, the relationship itself between
Right.
the two people who are being married to each other.
Yeah. The health of the marriage, and the marriage, like it says, constitutes its own value.
Mhm.
So, and that value actually in Hebrew and in Judaism means kiddushin. It says to sanctify. It's the act of holiness. So the act itself, choosing one partner out of billions, well, in our case, the market is a lot narrower, but choosing from many, just one, and not running around, creating a home, as we say, bait ne'eman, a faithful house. We say after every marriage, we say, may you build a faithful home within the Jewish people. So that faithful home is already a value in itself.
Mhm.
Okay.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
it's also the most rational and sensible that I've read from any of the sources. I mean, it's not doom and gloom. It's
Right.
hope, you know?
I think in this context, it's very important to say that, and I've read a lot about this, and even when I was in the Orthodox world at Yeshiva University, they had extensive conversations about it, and they all agreed that this is a medical procedure.
Mm.
So if you need it, you need it. So that's right there, all this category of you need it. And there's a lot of reasons to need it, including the health of the mother,
Right.
physically and mentally and spiritually. And as we see here, even the health of the marriage.
Mm.
So if the health of the marriage will be somehow rocked because of that, they can delay it and mitigate it. So, I think this is pretty much the Jewish value. I think the problem in America a lot of times is when conversations become a football game, and it's winner takes it all, and it's my side has to win, and
Yeah.
it's not black or white. It's it's a very complex issue. So I would just, before we get to the next source that I think is very interesting too. The Western notion of and kind of the Eastern notion of what it means. It is a lot of it is cultural. A lot of it is cultural. Yeah. So let's continue. Oh, Anne is gone again. Okay. Elaine, would you read source number 10? I think we'll probably end with that.
This is Rabbi Yitzchak Avi Rones, Family Planning, the Postponement of Mitzvah Peru. It is also
Puvu is be multiply. Be fruitful and multiply.
he's a doctoral student in the Talmud department at Bar Ilan. He's not quite out there yet, but it is also important to note that the rabbi's advice regarding the need to prepare a firm financial base before marriage, I like this guy, is purposefully vague. The expression to build a house and plant a vineyard does not convey a clear notion in regard to the size of the home or the size and quality of the vineyard. Yet the rabbi's directive here is that no matter what minimal lifestyle one deems necessary for oneself, appropriate steps must be taken to ensure that this standard of living be maintained as one's family and expenses grow. For otherwise, domestic strife will surely follow. Far from being some sort of foreign Western notion, a young couple's financial considerations and concerns are fully in accord with the Torah's understanding of the ideal way to set up a household. Very practical, very good. I approve.
I would add here that also the word for blood in Hebrew and the word for money is the same word, damim. So when, right, kind of coming full circle with the first source from the Talmud that says that you are shedding blood if you're not having children, you can also say, financial stability and financial health can be equated to physical health and other ways of health. So so this is an interesting thing because we do the chuppah. In a sense, we reenact that idea that a groom brings the bride into his home, right? That's really what that means. That's why the wife always comes second. So the groom is already there and he welcomes her. So the idea that he betrothed the wife, engaged, and then about a year later, or within a year, he goes and figures out financial stability. So yeah, that's basically what it is. And I think those values are in alignment with the Western notion of financial stability. That may be why Jews in America are comfortable with that, with this idea. Okay, we are pretty much out of time. I guess we can just maybe the last source, which is short enough. Who's the next? Adrian, would you like to read that?
Sure. Rabbi Edward Feld, Torah Not History, The Spirit of Renewal, Finding Faith After the Holocaust. He's a conservative rabbi in the Rabbinical Assembly, High Holiday Mazur. Oh, he's one of the editors of the High Holiday Mazur. Okay. The 60 years between the destruction of the temple and the Bar Kokhba revolution were among the most
hermeneutically many explanations, interpretations,
and legally creative in Judaism's history. The fabric of Jewish life was interwoven with study, creative interpretation, and legal disquisition. This guy has got to learn to speak a little more clearly. Thus, he's showing off. Thus, when the rabbis of the generation of Bar Kokhba had to decide which were the most central Jewish institutions to protect, the study and transmission of Torah stood out as the essential instrument of religious preservation. What? I got to read that again.
The notion was, the premise is that and that's why the Torah, again, it plays a big role, because it's the study of the law. If you don't know, you're not going to be able to practice it. That's
Right.
why the heavy weight of the studying Torah, which of course I personally can understand that. But what he's saying here is that the preservation of the Jewish people didn't come only from procreation, that the value of Torah is really another, in many ways, many manifestation, become the the value that we live for as well. So these are the thing. Now I want to just ask the last question of you, and it could be an open question. We don't even have to get any conclusion, of course, but in terms of dealing with abortion, which is life, right? I have my opinion where it starts, and you may have a different opinion. Where do you see it as a start? And do you think that the United States will be able to figure out a line where it's before life and after?
I think it depends on what part of the country you live in. I would like to think that life begins when the child is born and becomes a part of our world. And I wouldn't say that it's a life after her first period. After her first period is missed. That's the 40 days. No, I think that's wrong.
Many people say about that is that by that time, usually women don't even know a lot of women don't even know they're pregnant.
Not at all.
Still at this time. So it kind of, they made aware of it when it's already too late. So yeah, this is where the core of the, just to bring it back to the beginning and conclude with that, that the main questions here are, of course, to begin with, either is it an obligation or a blessing? It changes the way we interact with it. What age is life? When is life and when it's not, legally and ethically? And the other values that compete with it, as financial and relationship stability and so forth.
And also who decides.
That's right.
Right, and who decides? We did not
Who
touch upon
decides is-
that. We did not.
Yeah.
Let me finish close maybe the recording. If you just want to say something before we end the recording, then we can maybe ask that question off.
Well, I wanted to say something before we finished completely.
Yes.
And that is, I wanted to, resounding thank you for the wisdom of your teaching and for the way you adjusted the course to meet our needs. I also want to
you.
thank everybody who participated. I
Yes,
have
thank
something
you.
written out here that I need my glasses for. I think we really enriched each other in others' experience in many ways. This was true for me. I felt that I got to know everybody's views and something about each person who spoke something about our lives when we had these discussions, which I think were very rich. And for me, the course was fulfilled because we learned about perennial issues in Judaism, particularism, universalism, especially in relation to Tikkun Olam. We learned also about law and love, where the balance is, which takes precedence when. Ritual tradition and ritual change, why, when, how. And then also who has the authorities in matters of, who has the authority in matters of tradition. That was a topic that got a big response. That whose voices are heard. And again, that's in relation to this, to what we've just finished discussing, whose voices are heard when these decisions are made. So I think we learned about Jewish history. We deepened our understanding of what Judaism is, what the core values are, where the balance is. Beyond dispute meant coming together for me. That's what it meant. And that's what's important about this. And I really appreciated what you said at the beginning about, maybe doing it again. And I certainly would be willing to do it again. I think we can go so much deeper now that we have the knowledge, that we had experience with some of the language and some of the sources that we have.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, it's the importance of argument for the sake of heaven. That's where we started. And that to me is key, argument for the sake of heaven. So thank you to everybody, and especially those stalwarts who came every single time. And I know it wasn't possible for everybody to come every single time,
Yeah, of course.
but appreciation
Thank
to
you,
all who
Anne. Thank you,
participated.
Rabbi. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you,
thank
Rabbi,
you, really,
and
for
thank you,
everybody. I
Anne.
enjoyed it very much. I always enjoy teaching. This is not a burden for me, because teaching is also means for me that I have to prepare for this, which means that I'm studying more Torah. So for me, that's not a burden at all. This is, the more I do that, the better I feel. So thank you very much for being a captive audience, but captivated too, I hope.
How could you not love a congregation that can have, a group of people that can have the kind of discussion we had today? The
Yes.
freedom
I'm
of
going to end the
expression.
recording, and then we can.
Oh, we didn't end the recording? Okay, that's okay.
Thank you, Anne.